At the dawn of the 14th century, Western civilization is riding a phenomenal streak of prosperity.
Europe has had 3, maybe 4 centuries of really good times. The church has been strong, various kingdoms have been strong, trade has grown, cities have grown, industry has grown, there haven't been any natural catastrophes, weather's been nice, population's been growing. It's really been a nice time for Europe.
But this long expansion is about to collide with a new reality. Suddenly, global climate patterns shift. Temperatures plummet and crops fail. With startling swiftness, the Golden Age collapses and visions of the apocalypse come true. Far to the east, on the Mongolian steppes, something terrible has awakened. An invisible agent of death. Rumors fly that all of humanity is being wiped out in China, India, and the Islamic world. Before 1347, the Mongols seem unstoppable. Their dominion over the East has lasted nearly 150 years in an empire stretching from the peaks of Tibet to beyond the Volga River, and from Beijing to Constantinople. Relentlessly, the pestilence creeps across the steppes, wiping out whole villages, the bodies swollen with malignant sores. In this harsh wilderness, nothing goes to waste. Valuable goods like furs and blankets are always salvaged. The rest is torched, an attempt to kill the evil that caused this tragedy. But the unseen demon travels with the loot. At the end of the Mongol trade routes lies the port city of Kaffa on the Black Sea, starting point for merchant ships en route to Italy. But while these facts seem clear, a mystery remains. After such a slow beginning, how does the plague spread to Europe so fast? Many historians believe it hitches a ride on merchant boats bound for Europe, and its first port of call is the island of Sicily. To the people of the shore and inlets of Italy, the waves have always delivered up the odds and ends of the Mediterranean storms. But this year, something different washes ashore.
Ah! Oh mio Dio! Andiamocene via! Andiamocene!
Aspettami!
And in the towns, ships from the Black Sea sail into harbor, bearing something foul. Below decks, the Italians find a cargo of corpses. The few survivors are reported to have sickness clinging to their very bones. When the townspeople realize the danger, they try to banish the plague ships from their harbor, but it is too late. The plague has already taken hold, and the dying begins. This is no ordinary illness. It is disgusting and painful. Its victims fall into terrible fever and dark despair.
Initially, it would have been difficult to tell the early symptoms of Black Death from a very heavy flu-like, what we would consider to be flu-like symptoms, and fevers, chills, and a high temperature. And then there would be a second stage where there would be development of the welts, the swelling of the buboes.
The The bubo is a painfully enlarged lymph gland in the neck or groin. They become black and can swell to the size of an orange. It is these buboes that suggest bubonic plague may be the cause of the Black Death. Like pioneers in death, the people of the Sicilian town of Messina soon discover that this new disease is not only awful, but also highly contagious. It quickly spreads within families, sowing terror in every quarter. And the horror has just begun. Already other Genoese ships from Caffa are landing on the Italian mainland. They bear furs, textiles, and rats, all fine purveyors of death. Like an avenging angel, the plague will sweep across an unsuspecting continent as the apocalypse begins. For medieval science is mired in a fog of superstition and ignorance. Guy de Chauliac is surgeon to Philip VI, King of France, as well as Pope Clement VI, who resides in Avignon, France. Renowned for his great intellect, he has been trained by the best physicians in Europe at the monastery in Montpellier. His techniques, like bleeding with leeches, are all designed to restore balance to the body. Away from the elite power centers of Avignon and Paris, in merchant towns like Geneva or Venice, common people have less elaborate theories about the source of the plague. They've been indoctrinated since birth to believe that, like all blessings, curses all ultimately flow from God. We now know that it was not sin or evil that brought on the Black Death. It was a contagious disease. The question is, which disease? For more than a century, the main theory has been that the Black Death was caused by bubonic plague, caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. It is carried by fleas and requires a very particular environment to flourish. In many ways, medieval Europe seems to fit the bill.
Urban centers, garbage on the streets, tremendous milieu in which to breed huge rat populations.
A single flea bite injects the victim with Yersinia pestis bacteria. They quickly multiply in the lymph nodes, filling them to bursting. Once released into the bloodstream, the bacteria causes the black welts that give the Black Plague its name. And there is another, even deadlier form of the disease, called pneumonic plague. It needs no flea to spread its poison.
Basically spread across Europe, Western Europe, within 4 or 5 years. It's incredibly rapid spread, considering that they didn't have trains, planes, automobiles, that the transportation was by foot or by horseback. I mean, it's a very, very rapid spread of the disease.
Venetians are dying at the astonishing rate of 600 a day. In January of 1348, the plague enters France through ships trading at Marseille. It sails over water to Spain. In Barcelona, 60% of the population perishes. By August 1348, the plague reaches Paris. Half its population will die. Consumed by fear, many of the gentry flee the cities, leaving the less fortunate to fend for themselves.
What we see in literature are these cowardly figures, the rich who are going into the countryside and who are there frightened by their own mortality. So who's left behind? Who is back in town suffering but the poor and those who are unable to do what the rich can?
Already it has claimed the lives of millions. In every village, in every farm, the corpses pile up in staggering numbers, creating a new crisis: how to dispose of the dead.
If you lose 10% of 95,000 people, think about that. That's 10,000 people. How do you bury 10,000 people that have been lost in a very short period of time? Where do you find the people to take them? Where do you find the people where do you find the carts to take them?
In 1349, graves must be found for nearly 300 people a day in London. The situation is even worse in Avignon. In one 6-week period, 11,000 people are buried in a single graveyard. The Pope is finally driven to consecrate the Rhone River. Countless bodies are committed to a watery, unmarked grave. In the winter of 1349, the plague pushes north to the Scandinavian peninsula. By the time it reaches Russia, 2 years later, the crisis is over in France. After wiping out almost half the population of Europe, the plague itself is sputtering to an end. Urban centers and religious communities have suffered most. 60% of Venice has been swept away in the epidemic. In Avignon, half the citizens are dead. Still, the vast majority of survivors neither sink into despair nor wallow in excess. Most simply pick up and get on with the process of living. They never lose faith in God, or, even more remarkably, their faith in the future. In the Italian countryside, another transformation is taking place. Prior to the plague, famine is common. Though every inch of land is sowed, supply never catches up to the soaring demand. Now, even with much of the land gone fallow, there is food to spare. For the first time in centuries, farmers can grow not just grain but luxury crops, and so Italy becomes a country rich in olive oil and fragrant fruit. The repercussions of a smaller workforce ripple into the more peaceful pursuits of commerce and industry as well.
Simply, the destruction of so many people forced the survivors to come up with labor-saving devices such as the printing press.
Industries that used to rely heavily on surplus manual labor, like the cloth industry, which used to be able to count on lots of dislocated peasants who didn't have land because there were so many people and the land was fixed. They can't rely on that labor, so they start to turn to other kinds of solutions, technological solutions, like mills.
Death clings to their imaginations like a menacing shadow and creeps into the late medieval art known as danse macabre.
The kind of Dutch paintings you see with skeletons dancing and with a kind of memento mori, just remember death. Death is everywhere.
In time, the social upheaval of the post-plague years, the questioning attitudes and increased individualism all lead to the greatest flowering of culture and knowledge in European history: the Renaissance. Surprisingly, the microbe that causes bubonic plague still exists in our world today. In Saudi Arabia, North and South Africa, parts of South America, and the United States. In 1900, the microbe hitches a ride from its perennial breeding grounds in China aboard merchant ships to California, spawning an outbreak of bubonic plague in the United States. From the west coast, it travels inland, where it finds a fertile new host population, the rodent communities of America's deserts and grasslands. When the Black Death ravages the people of the 14th century, the only effective treatment seems to be a miracle. Now, antibiotics can cure bubonic plague, if the case is identified early enough. In medieval times, the Black Death comes from a remote area and then spreads along trade routes to the entire civilized world with startling speed. Microbes traveling now can go much further and far faster. Restoration and renewal. These are the legacies of the Black Death.